This is the 4th of our 5 sustainability seminars, and this is all about carbon footprints and what you can do to reduce yours. And as I said, we're joined by Charlotte and Lorenzo, who have been our amazingly helpful partners in the work we've done on this so far. So we published a sustainability report, and as part of that, we divided the impact we have on the planet into 5 main areas. And this one relates to our impact pillar, which is called zero carbon. So for zero carbon, our aim, our mission is to become carbon neutral and eventually climate positive. And this is a journey, and we're quite early on in our journey, but we have made some progress in a few things so far. So with Charlie's help, we've measured some of our emissions. We've measured our scope 1 and 2 emissions, which are the emissions we directly cause. And then we've also measured part of our scope 3 emissions, which are the emissions which are indirectly caused by our business. And we have then offset the emissions that we've measured so far with Lorenzo and the Earthly team by funding a project that they have in the Amazon rainforest. And we're going to be deep diving into that project, and Lorenzo will share a lot more information. We didn't just offset 100% of our emissions, we actually went a little bit further and offset 110% of our emissions, because our long-term aim is to go beyond just being sustainable and not causing any damage, but actually to try and help regenerate the planet. And so although we haven't measured all of our emissions yet, and we can't say that we're carbon neutral yet, we have offset what we know about. And our aim for the future is to map and offset the rest of the emissions of our supply chain. So the bit that was too tricky and time consuming to do very quickly was to measure all of the impact of our ingredient emissions, because we have over 180 ingredients. And so it was too short a time frame and too difficult to collect the data for this year, but for 2020, but we're hoping to collect it in 2021. And then once we've done that, we'll be able to understand our full emissions by product, which will be really, really exciting. The other thing that we have done so far is that our Eco Studio, which we've been in for about 18 months, runs on wind-powered electricity, which means that our scope 1 and 2 emissions are really low, because the wind-powered electricity doesn't produce very much carbon at all. And we know that it isn't just about measuring and offsetting our emissions, we're trying to reduce them. So one of the ways we can do that is by trying to source our ingredients and packaging more locally, particularly the packaging, because it's quite heavy in lots of cases, because we use a lot of glass packaging. So we've managed to switch 60% of our packaging to EU sources, and we're looking at trying to switch the rest of the components. So things like pumps and things which often get made in Asia, we're trying to find European sources for those. The other thing we did was we've moved away from using small plastic jars, which are sort of not good for the environment, to mono-materials. And we use Cosmos certified ingredients. And the reason that organic ingredients are important is that they actually help to improve soil quality, and they help to lock carbon up, which means that they're really beneficial from a carbon perspective. So as I said, our future goal is to map, reduce and offset the rest of our emissions. We also have a plan for 2021, which I've already shared some sneaky peeks of earlier this week, to move our paper cartons to grass paper, which doesn't create as many carbon emissions. And we want to continue to source more of our packaging and ingredients locally. So that's what we've done. But now let's deep dive a bit. So that's what we've done, but what does it all mean? And how did we do the mapping? And there's lots of sort of interesting questions about that. As I was saying about the emissions, the emissions that we've measured, we've offset 110% with them. That means that we've gone beyond just being carbon neutral, and we've partnered with Earthly to do that. So I want to pass on to Lorenzo to tell us a little bit more about the project that we've funded, which is in the Amazon rainforest. I absolutely love the Amazon rainforest. I've been there and on an ingredient sourcing trip, and it's such a precious resource. I think it's really wonderful that we can support this project. So Lorenzo, would you like to tell us more about the project that we're working with you on?
For sure. I mean, obviously, to start with, it's so great to have worked with Evolve, but obviously, you know, what they're doing as a business is so important, not only in understanding their emissions, which is always the start, but also in clearly defining some reduction targets. And it's really, from working with Laura and the team, it's really at the heart of what they do, and it's great to see that. And that then moves on to the removal strategy. So in our mind, you know, what we've gone through really is a process of understanding the footprint and removing it. And with Laura's connection to the Amazon, we're able to work with a great project in the Peruvian Amazon. So the BAM project focuses on providing help to 405 local families who work closely with the forest in harvesting Brazil nuts. And you know, we all, I think, know a little bit about the importance of the Amazon. I think it's recently, with Bolsonaro at the helm of the Brazilian government, we've seen a huge amount of deforestation. And so this project is a REDD+ project. For those that don't sort of know about REDD+, REDD+ was a methodology that was agreed with by in the COP19 in 2019 to create a model to sort of protect deforestation and sort of look after the forests and nature-based solutions that we have today. And this project is incredible. They have protected almost 3,000 acres of rainforest and working closely with the people because, you know, the Brazil nuts are harvested from mature trees. And I don't know if you knew this, but a Brazil nut actually weighs 2 kilos. So they're quite an incredible seed to harvest. But yeah, this project is doing a great job of protecting the rainforest and working closely with not only sort of the people, but also boosting biodiversity. And that's at the heart of what we do at Earthly. We help businesses such as Evolve really look at investment into nature-based solutions, not only because of the carbon removal aspect, but also because of the social and biodiversity good that they're able to provide. And so it's great to have started Evolve with this particular project.
And I'm super excited. When I went to Brazil, I actually saw Brazil nut trees, and they are the most majestic and enormous trees you could imagine. And the Brazil nuts, when they come, they're actually in a huge ball like this. Yeah. I have a photo. Someone got one for me, and they sliced the top off, and you could see all the Brazil nuts inside. It looks a little bit like an orange. And they said that if this lands on your head when you're walking underneath a tree, it can really hurt you. This thing is a huge, great big nut. So yeah, it's really interesting that they're working on those. And I've no idea how they harvest them because they're so high up. These trees are absolutely giant, and they must be incredibly old to be that big. Yeah. They're really, really precious. So I just wanted to stop at this point and see, I'm not really able with this computer to see if there's any questions so far. So please for that. But I don't know if I've broken the screen sharing, but can anybody, my co-presenters or Jess, just read out any questions we've had so far on the chat, please?
Let's see if I can see any. I can't see any on my end.
Okay, so as we go through, don't worry if you don't have a question yet, do feel free to post it. I just wanted to have a little pause just to make sure I hadn't missed any. So that's wonderful, super excited about the BAM project. And now we're going to have a little bit of a deeper dive look at our supply chain and how we did some of the carbon footprinting. So this is just a sort of a picture to show that we know that our impact starts all the way back when our ingredients are farmed. And then, of course, there's a carbon created at all of the other steps in the process. So the ingredients coming to us and the packaging, of course, being created and coming to us. And then when the product's actually manufactured, when it's sent to end customers, and then there's impact all the way through until the packaging is hopefully recycled. So we understand that our impact is not just what we do, but it's this whole sort of spread from end to end. And I'm going to pass on to Charlie now, because this is a little bit more about the sort of the deep dive on the on our emissions for 2020. So over to you, Charlie.
Hi, everyone, again. Zoe has just asked a question as to I guess the aim is to reduce as well as to offset. Is it a balance difficult to get right? And I guess in my opinion, no. I think you offset unavoidable emissions today and you set reductions today. And then tomorrow you reduce your offsetting because you've reduced the impact that you have as a business. And I guess the ultimate aim is to have reduced so much that you no longer need to offset. So I think offsetting comes hand in hand with some strong reduction targets based on the science and based on the figures. Zoe.
Yeah, I really agree with that. And we're very much looking at ways we can reduce. And I'm sure there's others. And if you can, it'd be great to kind of debate those at the end. So, the ones we've identified so far, we've moved our electricity consumption to a green source, and we're looking at how we, source more locally. But there could be, there's lots of others that in the longer term would like to do. So things like making products that are more concentrated, that have less water, so they're less heavy to ship around and things like that. So there's sort of loads of blue sky things floating around the team. We're not sure which ones of them will kind of be able to be, to come to life. But I think, we're really focused on it, and we really want, now we're measuring it. I think when you measure things, you can then track what you do. And I think that's really important.
Yes, for sure. And yeah, you cannot offset without knowing how much to offset in the first place. And so Evolve did a great exercise to really understand the carbon that they were producing in 2020. And the figure came to about 260 tons of CO2. And we looked at the majority of the business, minus ingredients, which we're hoping to do this year. The things that we looked at was the Eco Studio. So Evolve work where they also produce some of their products and manufacture them. And we also looked at the deliveries and the carbon footprint of deliveries to consumers. And then we also looked at all of the packaging Evolve had used in 2020 and the carbon footprint that was associated to that. And finally, we also looked at the team and did a neat exercise of just understanding their commutes and kind of food, lunches, food waste in the office, etc. And really looked at all-encompassing carbon footprinting Evolve as a business. What's great, as Laura's mentioned, is that their office space runs on renewable energy. And under the greenhouse gas protocol, this means that that's zero carbon. So that's already a great feature to have as a business. And if any of you are business owners on this call, switching to renewable energy often doesn't increase costs. So that's definitely a quick win where you can just get on the phone with Bulb or Octopus Energy to make that switch quite easily.
It was interesting when I first saw these charts, just to understand the implications of some of the things we do. I was particularly surprised by domestic air, because I didn't realize that DHL even used domestic air. And I went and got these figures checked, and they said, oh no, we do, we fly things around the UK. And I was surprised by that. So I sort of started talking to them about, we actually ship most of our orders with them by road, even though you can't really see it. It's just amazing how much of a percentage of it the air emissions are, given that it's not a huge percentage. Wherever we can, we ship by road. So that's really interesting. Yeah. And then, of course, glass packaging is heavier. There's lots of issues with plastic that we're aware of. So that's interesting that glass packaging is such a large percentage of the packaging emissions. So it does really make us think about, what we can do differently, how we can continue to, improve and evolve in this area.
Yeah, agreed. And I think there are three major things that cause high carbon footprints in businesses. The first one, if is there any air travel involved, whether it's business travel or air travel related to deliveries, that shoots up carbon footprints. The second one is your energy supply. If you have a non-renewable energy supply for your office or your manufacturing, again, that's a high footprint. And then secondly, as well, it comes down to the raw materials you use. And as you can see, for example, in the packaging emissions, glass, although is super recyclable, is quite intensive to make. And it's also quite heavy to transport. And so sometimes it's quite difficult to make decisions where if you want to be zero waste or circular, except also low carbon and fight kind of global warming, making these trade-offs and these decisions can be quite difficult. And I guess the next step forward for Evolve is to really understand all of the hundreds of ingredients they use for their products, understanding the carbon footprint related to that. And that's an exercise I'm looking forward to this year.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to just flip to the next slide because there's a couple more slides on this area. So this is just a sort of a summary of the previous pie charts, just showing where our emissions come from. Do you want to explain a bit more about this scope 1, 2, and 3 angle, Charlie?
So the chart looks really weird because there's nothing in scope 1, very little in scope 2, and massive scope 3. And so I'm going to explain to you what scope emissions actually are. And scope 1 are direct emissions related to using fuel. So originally, when scope emissions were defined, they were for big factories, like big players in this field. And a lot of them use fuel and combustion to produce loads of different materials in their warehouses and manufacturing. And so loads of smaller businesses like Evolve don't really have scope 1 because we're not using any fuel to combust anything. Scope 2 is related to electricity that you use. And that for Evolve was simply the electricity they used for their office space. And so again, that was quite little. And because they're running on renewable energy, a lot of it was basically zero. And then scope 3 is everything else. So business traveling, the team, ingredients, the whole supply chain, for example, and it's all indirect emissions of a business. The sad reality is that policies today in the UK only state that scope 1 and 2 are necessary for big businesses to account for and to be transparent about. And yet scope 3 makes up for about 9% of the total of emissions a business produces. And so the fact that Evolve have really considered their scope 3 is great because that's where the biggest carbon footprint lies. Yeah.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Charlie. So we've finished the slide section of this presentation. I'm just going to take us off share. This is, I'll come back to this at the end, just talking.
Yeah, there are quite a few questions as well.
So do we have any more questions in the chat? Looks like we might do now. I've had some nice comments. Thank you very much. So from Zoe, for a retailer, quantifying your emissions from the brands you stock will be really difficult, might not be possible. Emissions from deliveries to customers, particularly international ones, will be huge. How do other retailers tackle this? So deliveries were the biggest area of our emissions, actually. And yeah, if you do stock third-party brands, it's tricky because we don't think there are many beauty companies who've done the exercise that we've done yet. We think we might, we don't want to say we're definitely the first because we may not be, but we think we're one of the first. And so, you know, hopefully others will follow suit, but it's difficult to even kind of understand where everyone else is at the moment, which is interesting.
I think a good exercise to do as a retailer is, rather than really wanting to get an absolute carbon footprint for each one of your products that you stock, is to simply start labeling them as low, medium, and high carbon footprints. And to just get a scope for, okay, what percentage of my products on my shelves are high carbon or low carbon. And then in terms of deliveries, DHL, FedEx use so much data, and there's so much accessible to you if you ask for information from them. And as a retailer, you almost have more power than a smaller brand like Evolve to ask for that information because you're an important client. And there's some amazing schemes like DHL Go Green, where you can switch to make sure all your deliveries are carbon offset and tracked. So definitely have a look at that as a retailer.
Yeah, we've been looking at that with DHL, and there are different delivery services that they offer, and some of them are covered by the Grow Green scheme and some aren't. So their economy service, which we use for some of our sort of European free shipping deliveries, they kind of go into the global postal service, so they don't get included in that, but all of their express and their road services do. But because we do use those economy services, we think we might just ask them for the data. You can get like a full carbon mapping exercise done with them, and then we can then include that. That's basically what we did to be able to get the data for this year, but we can get that every year from them. And then we'll be able to do an offset each year, and we do our mapping each year. Sorry, Lorenzo, what were you going to say?
No, I was just going to say that I think taking a step back, I think in the future, we are seeing a lot of pressure in the European Union to look at labeling, to make it really easy, make it easy for customers to understand the carbon footprint of products. It's not legislated yet, but companies like Evolve are taking that step, being the first to do it. And I think, we're seeing more and more of that from a perspective of brands pushing for this, so that consumers can clearly understand their footprint when they're making buying choices. Looking at it from a consumer's point of view, the average footprint now in the UK is around 8 tons. And to meet the IPCC targets for 2050, we should be looking at about 2 tons. So there's a huge amount of work to be done. And I think informing and behavioral change is going to be at the heart of this. And so it's great to see Laura leading the charge, looking at the reduction targets and clearly defining this for her products and business.
Well, my hope on all of this is that it inspires other brands to do the same. And the fact that we were able to do this, working with Charlie, working with Lorenzo, shows that it's possible, even when you are quite a small business and you don't have huge budgets and resources to work on this. And I wouldn't say we were teeny weeny anymore. We've been going for 10 years, but we're still not enormous. So it is possible. And I think it's great. This is exactly the kind of thing that, ethical and clean brands should be doing. So it shouldn't be just about, like window dressing. We need to get to actually, doing this properly, measuring it, being rigorous about it, because otherwise we're not going to make any difference.
And I would add to that it's actually easier the sooner you do it. The more complex a business is. We're speaking to a big fashion retailer, and it's going to be a lot more complicated and expensive. So the earlier you put sustainability at the core of your business, the better.
We've had a few more comments. Are there any other beauty brands working with you, Lorenzo? Sounds like a really important way of doing business sustainably.
We've worked with a few different beauty brands. We did a big piece of work with Garnier on the launch of their green beauty initiative. We planted some 400,000 trees, and we are working with businesses of all different shapes and sizes. It's actually just an amazing thing to look at in a way. The fact that businesses were under such difficult times with COVID. But actually, so many of them took a step back to look at their impact. And I was, I think for me that is a great testament to us as a species in terms of looking at, in a difficult time, to actually take the time to look at our impact and how we can solve these future problems. So, yeah, we're working with all companies of all different sizes some who have sustainability at their core and some who are just really trying to get their first footing in the door to understand how to start this journey as well.
That's really awesome. The other questions we've had, so, how to get into working with a business that has these types of values. What we've found as we've grown as a business and we've sort of started doing more and more of this, although we've been trying to do this for a long time, is that we're now finding a lot of like-minded people are coming to, want to be on board with us and work with us. And for us, that's amazing. We are now getting the most amazingly talented people. And my team, I'm so grateful for my amazing team. There are some really, really amazing people in my team. And I feel really happy that a lot of people in my team are really inspired by what we're doing. And it really helps to motivate everybody, because everyone feels like we're trying to do something good in the world. And I think that's fantastic. So, as a business owner, it's great because that was my mission all along, but it's also a great way of attracting really amazing people to join my business, because the more people we have in our team who are, you know, really inspired by it, the better. So I think, you know, it's a fantastic retention and recruitment tool as well. And I don't do it for that reason, but it has really helped us really get the most awesome team in place. And I'm really, really proud of everyone. And it wasn't just me pulling this together from our side. There was a whole big team of people who worked with Charlie to do this exercise.
Yeah. And I think advice on a personal level, if you're looking to get into businesses who do good, there are loads of free courses or courses at low cost that you can do to get some experience and seem more attractive and valuable that way. And then also loads of small brands are looking for help from time to time. So approach people on LinkedIn, ask if you could volunteer for 1 or 2 weeks. Come with a purpose, say, you know, it looks like you have a gap in this. I'd love to do some sustainability research on the products you're launching, for example, and that will give you experience and knowledge, and also a network that you can bounce off to hopefully land a job.
And we do take interns at Evolve, but we don't do free internships because we don't believe that that's the right thing to do. So we have had several interns in the last 12 months, and we actually made offers to 3 of our interns, and we have 2 of them working with us now. So for example, my junior development chemist came in as an intern in September, and she's now making all of our samples and just doing some fantastic work. So she did have some experience in science, but she didn't have a formulation qualification, but she's been able to get up and running and do that. We've had several interns in our sales and marketing team who are doing research, a bit like what Charlie's saying. And so, you know, I think it's really good just to, as Charlie says, just to approach people, because they may not have been necessarily looking. We weren't always looking for all of the interns who came along, although sometimes we do look for interns and advertise. But sometimes it's a great way to show what you can do for a business. But we always make sure we pay people a living wage, because we don't want to make anyone feel like they have to work for free.
Mm.
Jess has asked a question: how can we as individuals make steps to reduce our carbon footprints day to day when it comes to consumption, other than buying less?
I think I definitely agree with buying less. I think being minimalist and also kind of conscious buying, like making sure that items that you buy have a purpose and a meaning. And, you know, think twice before you press that checkout button on Amazon. Otherwise, obviously, there's the big kind of very spoken about moving towards eating less meat. Also, you know, exploring the UK. If you are in the UK, rather than having to travel abroad, there's some amazing places here, and you don't necessarily have to air travel to get what you need, which is a breath of fresh air and connection with others. And also something that I find that is also very important is, if you are earning, put some of your earnings back into climate, and pledge some of your earnings into these sustainable investment funds, or make more regular donations, and really think about, is your pension scheme green, for example? Is your bank green as well? Because it's great that there are so many conservation projects out there, but so many of them need funding. And so rather than buying that, I don't know, new dress or very expensive flight to the Bahamas this year, have a look at whether you could support a project through your finances.
And I would add to that, you know, try to push for your employer as well. You know, be a mouthpiece to what you believe in, and try to push your employer to check out how they're paying for their energy. As Charlie pointed out in the first place, there's some really quick wins that actually can save money today. It's amazing to think how many people are still on fossil fuel burning energy contracts when renewable is actually cheaper. And so much better for the environment. So be that person who speaks to their employer, who speaks to and drives change. Don't sit back, I think, is the key.
And it's lots of little changes. I think with Evolve, what we've always wanted is to kind of help people make really small changes, but small changes add up. If you change your habits bit by bit, it doesn't have to be daunting or, you know, sort of too inconvenient to your lifestyle. You can find lovely products now which are green and ethical. And, you know, that's what we've always wanted. We wanted to kind of make it easy for people to make these switches. And I think, you know, being mindful about what you make, but still really enjoying. We've always said, you know, with beauty products, buy the ones that you really need and then really enjoy using them. It's such a shame when you buy products and then they don't get used. That's even worse than anything else. You know, if you are going to use them, then really enjoy them. Use that mask and actually really love using it and have a nice, you know, treatment or wellness ritual that goes with it. And you know, if you're mindful about when you buy things and then you really enjoy them, you'll still get that satisfaction and that lovely, probably even more so, especially if you feel that you have, you know, the impact of it end to end has been beneficial. So, do we have any other questions from anybody? We have gone through all of our materials. We've got these two experts here who can answer any of your questions about greening your own lifestyle or really about anything else to do with carbon. I'm just going to scroll up the chat.
It's quite a good one from Jess, actually. To clarify, are the emissions caused by glass or due to the manufacture of it? Charlie, maybe given how much sort of impact there was on the glass, maybe you could go into a little bit of detail.
Yeah, so what we did there was looked at the emissions related to the extraction and making of glass. The actual processing is quite emission heavy because you have to melt the glass, cool the glass, shape the glass, etc. So the emissions there are related to simply the manufacturing and the processing of glass. And not necessarily the transporting of glass, which probably would be higher than plastic just because it is heavier. Yeah.
We were talking about that on the waste seminar earlier in the week, and we were talking about the fact that glass was more recyclable because it doesn't get downcycled in terms, you know, when you recycle plastic, each time you recycle it, it's a little bit more mixed up and you end up having to make black plastic things rather than clear plastic things because it's not such a clear material when it's recycled. And we were talking about the fact that it's, you know, in some ways not a great material, but then it is very light to transport and it doesn't break. And we were talking about aluminium and whether it's a good solution because it doesn't break, but it's also quite light rather. But we were wondering, and this is my question for you, Charlie, how emission heavy is it versus glass? Because it's really hot, isn't it, when you smelt aluminium?
I think best case scenario, you use secondary aluminium. So recycling aluminium in the UK, about 72% of aluminium gets recycled, and that's the highest recyclability rate of any other material. And to give you an indication on plastic, about 14% of plastics get properly recycled and reused, which is really little. And I think if you did source aluminium for your packaging, if you use secondary aluminium, recycled aluminium, then you'd almost be contributing to this kind of circular loop and would have a reduced carbon footprint related to that.
That's interesting. I think we need to, next time we do our footprinting, we need to look at how much of our materials are recycled, because we've got to the point where 60% of all of our packaging has some recycled material, whether it's plastic or glass or paper. So yeah, it's sort of, there were so many different trade-offs, because the problem with aluminium we've had is that it really dents. And so when you transport it around, you get a high return rate from customers, lots of complaints if you use it. We've tried to use it for gift sets and things and had problems with it. But yeah, it is, I mean, other brands are using it who are sort of in the eco-sustainability world. So it is an interesting option.
Yeah. There's been another question from Zoe as to whether large companies are also starting to look at this in terms of, yeah, Amazon Prime seems to fly in the face of emissions. Yes, agreed. I think Amazon are definitely doing loads of work on optimizing their logistics and therefore optimizing how many trucks have to go out and the routes that they take, etc. they have just launched this climate fund where they do want to invest in sustainable startups that can solve the fact that they produce a lot of emissions. But I don't know how I feel about Amazon in terms of it really is the epiphany of this like just non-conscious competitive consumerism. And it makes it so easy to put things in your basket, so easy to buy. Now that you have Alexa, you can even buy just by saying. And their whole concept is based off just using more and more resources and selling those resources. And so I do think a lot of companies, same with Apple, etc., have made these amazing, we're going to get net zero to 2030. But unless you decouple resource use from economic growth, we're going to get nowhere, because the problem is endogenic. It's how businesses do business, and it's not being, offsetting at the end of it and then saying that's zero. You have to reduce, and you have to look at the way you do business. So I hope they do, and I hope that's what they're planning to do.
The questions are coming in. This is fantastic, guys. So thank you so much for being so engaged in this. So Evelyn asks, do many courier and delivery companies use electric vehicles in the UK?
I think more and more. So Ocado now have electric vehicles. Some also use things like biofuels. I also think to avoid being taxed in the ultra emissions zone in London, if you're an electric vehicle, you're taxed less. And so now there are more and more incentives to have electric vehicles within London. And I think that's where things are going, is actually it's going to be less expensive to rent electric vehicles than it is to have a polluting diesel car.
I'm moving to an electric car. I'm leasing it. It should arrive next month. We've got a charging point at work. It's going to be wind powered when I charge it up. So what I really like is the service Zipcar, and they also they use renewable energy, and I think that's a great way, especially for small businesses who might be on the call today. You can rent out vans for not too expensive, and the vans themselves run on renewable energy. So that's a great way to make sure your services, your deliveries are greener. Couple of really good questions from Zoe as well. What are the pros and cons of using glass versus 100% recycled plastic? So some of the ones that we have been debating is the fact that the plastic is unbreakable. That's true of all plastic. And it's light to transport, so it has fewer emissions when you move it around. The glass is very inert, which means it doesn't react with the product, which is very good, whereas some plastics can potentially interact with products. So those are the things we think about. The glass is heavy, but it can be recycled again and again and again. What do you guys think, Charlie and Lorenzo?
Yeah, I think, I guess the pros and cons actually lie on the kind of the life or the journey of the glass and the plastic. So at the start of its life, glass is super intensive because you have to make it, etc. But actually at the end of its life, it's very likely to be recycled, and that's great. In terms of plastic, it's actually super low in terms of footprint to produce plastic, just because we now have systems in place that produce like PET like this. But 100% recycled plastic is always misleading, because you need to have the infrastructure in your borough for that to happen. And then that needs to be put in the right place. And then, as we've stated, only 14% of that gets recycled. And recycling actually means downgrading it into another kind of weaker form of plastic. And so you can only recycle plastic so many times. And that's where the large carbon footprint is. So again, it's really understanding, where do your values lie? Do they lie in making sure your products are low carbon, or making sure that things are circular or low in waste, for example? So there's so many there will have to be a trade-off, basically, and you'll have to be transparent about that as a brand.
Yeah, I would support that. I think from my perspective, I think looking at plastics and the low rates of recyclability is a huge issue. There's also other areas of, that plastic waste and what we've seen in terms of microplastics. So there's a lot of other issues around plastic. And And, you know, one of the interesting things, if you ever have the time, is to actually go to a recycle plant. If there is a huge one in Lambeth, if you ever have the chance, but you're able to see the process. And, you know, I think to Charlie's point, when we say, you know, recycled plastic, so many producers are actually, just for the most simple reasons, they're not choosing to use recycled plastic because they might make their packaging slightly opaque. And I think we just got to push as consumers to sort of say, look, we don't care if the orange juice bottle is slightly opaque. It just doesn't matter to us. We'd much rather, if you're going to go down this route, to try to at least use recycled plastic. So again, use your voice and consume, and as a consumer, to sort of push as hard as you can.
Yeah, vote with your wallet.
Let's keep going on the plastics recycling discussion. We'll come back to Zoe's second question about measuring emissions in a minute. Eva asked an interesting question about, there's a new method of chemical recycling that allows plastic to be transformed back to virgin plastic. I don't have much information about that. Do you guys know much about that?
Yeah, this is it's still quite an intensive process because it's new. And I think, like all new technologies, systems aren't really in place. Things take a lot of time, etc. And so it is quite an intensive process. If you are collecting the plastics that you produce from your consumers, etc., and you can actually go to this facility and hand over the plastics, then that's great. But again, if we are relying on consumers to make sure they recycle their plastic and it gets to this chemical recycling plant, then that's most likely not going to happen. Yeah.
That's interesting. Thank you for that. Let's talk a little bit about measuring emissions and the process that we followed, because I felt that with your help, Charlie, the process was something that any business would be able to spare the time to do. It wasn't a super difficult or time-consuming process. I don't know whether our experience was typical, whether we did it more quickly than most people you've worked with, or whether it was normal. It'd be interesting to know your experience.
Yeah, I think a lot of businesses think, oh my gosh, like measuring carbon footprint, that's daunting, it's full of jargon, it's going to take so much time, and it doesn't. What it really comes down to is the data that you have access to in-house. So Laura was super organized and handed me some Excels of like, this is the packaging that we bought, here are the deliveries that we had, and we associated that to an emission factor and a carbon footprint. And so there was probably a 1 to 2 week turnaround if we'd, you know, it was kind of through the Christmas holidays, so things were a bit like patchy, but if we were able to put it all together, you can have a 1 to 2 week turnaround. And it really depends on how fast you can collect data on your end. And what we do with my company is we make sure that's super easy with, basically a handbook, and we hold your hand throughout the process. But seems daunting, it isn't. I think that's a big myth, and it's easier than you think, and also less expensive than you think.
Yeah.
And there's go on, Lorenzo.
Go ahead. No, go. You have to go.
All I was going to say is that Charlie has access to a lot of really useful emission factors. So she was able to look at, you know, how much glass normally creates in terms of emissions. So we didn't have to go all the way back to each factory and ask them specifically, did you measure it? So it's able to get very good assumptions to be able to do the footprinting, and that really helps to sort of speed up the process.
And I would add that, you know, from a business perspective, you know, at Earthly, we tried to push people towards the best type of footprinting for their business structure. I think every business is slightly different, and there's lots of different ways of accounting for your business and your product footprint. And what Laura, you know, went through with Charlie was really the business footprint, and then the product footprint will be another beast, which will be tackled in 2021. But they, you know, the process follows clear guidelines, which is the greenhouse gas protocol. And I think there is some great new tools that are coming out as well. So if you were, let's say, speaking to Earthly and you were a financial business or a digital first business, then maybe there's another tool that might look at your calculation using your accountancy platforms. if you produce like Evolve, then looking into the actual business in depth, and then the product goes that step further. So I think it's the number one thing is being convinced that you want to do it, and having the resources ready to commit to doing it. Like Charlie said, Laura was very good at having the data to hand, and if you can do that and you can commit the time, then I think you'll find it a lot easier than you imagine.
Another interesting comment from Evelyn. So around this idea about opaque recycled plastic, as a interesting point about consumers getting used to seeing more opaque recycled plastic. As a consumer of luxury beauty products, I find glass is so much more appealing aesthetically than aluminium or plastic, which look cheaper. So the carbon labeling would definitely help consumers to look beyond the physical attributes of the packaging of the product. That's interesting. I think making it clearer what it's very hard to make a mindful decision if you don't have the data, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, I think
so I totally agree.
I would add, I think that totally. I think it's trying to make it as easy for customers as possible. There's so many options when you're, given the internet, or even when you walk into a shop. If we were out of COVID and could actually go into shops more regularly, but there's so many options, and people can hide also sustainability behind, let's say, having a green bottle. Coca-Cola's example of trying to be sustainable was once, I think, coloring their bottle green. So you've got to look beyond some of the stereotypes, and we can be, if we can get the European Union and governments to legislate for this, I think we will, as consumers, can actually choose our products better.
Yeah, I think, in the future, when more brands and more products have that information on them, then it will be something you can really use when you're making decisions between products. But yeah, at the moment, it's early days. The retailers that are Evolve, this is from Philippa, the retailers that are Evolve are in, what's their views on supporting your views on sustainability? So if we send orders online, and we then, that has a delivery impact. Are our retailers supporting us in getting our products to the consumer in a green way? Some of them are. So some of our retailers are super forward thinking on this. For example, Griaud in the US, who are leading the charge in working with clean and ethical brands in the US mostly, but also some international ones like us on, improving their packaging. They're inching the bar up and up on ingredients and packaging all the time. So they've just banned any single-use plastics like sachets at all from their stores. So they are a specialist retailer who really only sells sort of ethical and clean brands in the US. So they're doing a lot. In the UK, there's a big spread. So it depends. We work with health food stores, amazing partners like Planet Organic and Whole Foods, who are very aware of all the issues and sort of thinking and doing things in this area. We work with larger companies like John Lewis, who have real sort of ethos of sustainability. And we also work with big websites like Feel Unique. So we have a big spread of different partner retailers we work with, and they all have their own resources and views and sort of missions in this area. Lots of people are doing things, I think, but it depends, I think, where they're coming from and who their customers are. And we have some of our international customers on this call today, so some of our distributors in other countries are doing really amazing things as well. And Zoe, who's on the call, was at Naturismo. Hi, Zoe. It's something that is, really amazing, working with someone like Naturismo as well, who are really into this, like Griaud is, and doing an awful lot in terms of pushing these agendas and really, supporting brands like us, which we're really grateful for. But, as a general rule, I think retailers are dependent to some extent on what the brands do. And they can choose brands who are greener and cleaner if that's what they're doing as a mission. But then, they need the brands to do the legwork and to sort of, make those decisions so they can choose them to put in their stores.
I think I might answer Zoe's question on what retailers can do. I think in your question, sort of 100%, you could easily look at the deliveries. Like Charlie pointed out, there is like some delivery firms that are doing carbon-free deliveries, so that would be an easy bet. But I would also look at your footprint as a business. it isn't as hard as you think it is, and actually being able to measure what what you're doing as a business may enable you to set those reduction targets, which are so key here. So I wouldn't always be afraid of something being told, you know, difficult or tricky. I think I would look at it and start to break it down, start to take the first process, the first steps towards understanding your footprint, and then you can set the right goals for which stage the business is at.
Absolutely. Zoe says it's really hard to offer a plastic-free section because even Just Glass normally have plastic lids, and even with bamboo lids normally have a plastic seal. And we have the same difficulties. We would love to reduce plastic usage, but for some things like pumps and lids, there isn't a good alternative yet. And it's really about, you know, brands both big and small working with our suppliers to ask for new alternatives, and things are coming through. There's lots of really interesting work going on zero waste products, which is a lot of it still in development because it takes a few years to come through, but we're seeing a lot of the concepts being shared by our suppliers, and we're working on concepts like that with them as partners. So plastic free, and, you know, having pumps are really tricky to recycle, and to find recycled, and there's reasons for that because of the way they're made and how they need to be really super precision things. But, you know, we're hoping that as time goes on, it will get easier to find all the materials. And that's been my experience in the last sort of 15 years or so working in natural and organic beauty. At the beginning, there weren't any natural and organic ingredients really to choose from. And now there are so many because suppliers have sort of responded to what customers want. So as consumers, if you keep on asking the questions and making the right green choices, you're helping to change the industry. It just sometimes takes a while for it to flow through the supply chain. But rest assured, they're all thinking about single-use plastic and carbon and things like that, because that's what people are asking for. So I think we might wrap up. This has been such a great session, everybody, and really fantastic questions. Thank you. I'm just going to quickly share my screen one last time and show a few details about tomorrow's seminar. So I have a final seminar tomorrow, which is all about ethical business in general, and I'm joined by my good friend and also an author in the ethical business area, John Grant. And he and I are going to be having an interview style seminar where we basically just chat through lots of issues around ethical business, and we will be looking at some of the initiatives we've done in our Kind to All impact pillar as well. But we'll be having a general discussion, which will be relevant for anyone who's thinking about setting up an ethical business. And if you'd like to join us, then the registration details are on our Sustainability Summit page, and the website address is on the slide. So you're able to join us for that last session. And I also just want to say thank you so much to all of my amazing co-hosts, to Charlie and Lorenzo, and to everyone for asking so many good questions. So I felt like this session was really, really informative and really interesting to have all the discussions. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. Have a good day. Bye.
We'll put the recording up on the website, so share it with anybody that you think might be interested.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Laura, bye.